Hi friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. Today we continue our 10 Flaws series by looking at everyone's favorite Star Wars dog costume, the AT-AT. First made famous in The Empire Strikes Back, the AT-AT, or All-Terrain Armored Transport, was one of the most feared ground vehicles in the Imperial Army. But then again, it doesn't take much to scare a disorganized rabble of moisture farmers and bantha lovers. A direct descendant of the Republic all-terrain tactical enforcer, the AT-AT, like many Imperial designs, were focused on intimidation and pure power. The AT-AT's towering frame commanded most battlefields. It was heavily armored against most small arms fire, and its raised height also gave them additional protection from landmines and IEDs. The design of the AT-AT was a departure from the AT-AT's more practical approach. This large vessel was all about shock and awe. And while it performed well against frightened civilians and bandits, when the Rebel Alliance began forming a real resistance, the AT-AT's flaws began surfacing.
Will you look at the size of those things? Reinforced armor plating, heavy cannons, and anti-personnel blasters.
The AT-AT was 20 meters long and 22.5 meters high, which is about as tall as a 7-story building. We're not really sure how much an AT-AT weighs, but a cannon source says that it has a carrying capacity of 3,500 metric tons, which makes no sense. Converted to standard, that's almost 8 million pounds, and that is a real legitimate conversion. We're not making that up. 8 million pounds is about the weight of 60 M1A1 battle tanks. So I'm just going to write that off as some typical Star Wars nonsense. But what we do know is that the AT-AT is notorious for having problems on uneven ground and soft surfaces like deep mud due to its heavy weight and high center of gravity. So for an all-terrain vehicle, it definitely is lacking in performance. Just like all those stupid crossovers in the automobile market. Let's stop lying to ourselves, people. A CR-V is just a raised Honda Civic and nothing more. Anyway, the whole point of putting gigantic legs on an AT-AT is so that it can walk over obstacles that traditional wheels or treads couldn't get over. But when you scale up the design to such a massive size, any kind of benefits that you would get are negated. Forget sandy areas, not a stable enough foundation. Forget urban areas, you'll rip up all the roads and destroy the bridges. In Legends, during the assault on Echo Base on Hoth, several AT-ATs were launched before they even began their mission due to the unstable snowy ground. All that armor and the untraditional locomotion makes the walker extremely slow. In an ideal situation, meaning flat hard ground, the AT-AT could hit a top speed of 60 kilometers per hour or just under 40 miles per hour. And let's be honest, most of the time it's operating not even close to its top speed. This is unacceptable for a vehicle that is designed to transport troops. For one, it's considerably slower than other vehicles in the Imperial Army pool and needs to be carried around by Gazanti cruisers for longer distance travel. And when the AT-AT is used for an assault, it's painfully slow compared to alternative transports like Imperial shuttles or Imperial troop transports. In our own world, firepower trumps any kind of defensive measure that we can invent. There's always going to be a more powerful round that can get through the body armor that you just built. There's always going to be a missile system that can overwhelm that reactive armor you created. Hackers will always be able to unhack your most secure systems. In Star Wars, defensive technology is far more advanced than anything we have here on Earth, but still the best defense is not getting hit in the first place. Just ask any soldier who wears a plate carrier into battle. Those ceramic plates are for a last resort situation when things get seriously screwed up. The average soldier would much rather not get shot in the first place. That's why some soldiers choose to reduce the weight of their kit to give them increased mobility on the battlefield. This same principle should be applied to armored vehicles, especially ones as vulnerable as the AT-AT. Its impressive height just screams, "Hit me with air support or an orbital turbo laser." Now, in the earlier years of the Galactic Civil War, the AT-AT was mostly going up against inexperienced rebel troops. As the rebellion became better trained and equipped, they also figured out how to take down an AT-AT. Even the impressive armor of an AT-AT couldn't withstand the firepower of a well-equipped ground force or naval force. Now, if you look at it closely, the AT-AT actually reminds me of one of those large Gungan beasts of burden used during the Battle of Naboo. Notice what it's carrying on its back, a shield generator. The AT-AT is definitely large enough to fit one of these. After all, it should be able to carry 8 million pounds on its back. With a theater shield installed on top of an AT-AT, it would not only be protected from artillery and air support, it would also offer protection to friendly troops nearby. If the ATAT is really designed for troop transportation, it should have the smallest profile possible in order to avoid detection and attention. But the ATAT does the opposite with its 22.5 meter height. Now, having an armored vehicle tip over because of a blast or uneven terrain is dangerous enough for the occupants of a vehicle, but placing that vehicle 7 stories in the air is just adding more unnecessary danger to the situation, especially if you look at how easy it is to topple the ATAT. When a person falls from 22.5 meters high, they're traveling at a speed of 75 kilometers per hour or 46 miles per hour when they hit the ground. That is not a survivable speed, especially if you're not in a crash seat or have a seatbelt on. The height of the vehicle makes what should be a disabling shot turn into a fatal accident for the entire crew. And actually, at this height, I would even recommend adding ejection seats to the cockpit of this machine.
How many legs they got? Looks like 4. 4? How are they not falling over?
The AT-AT's legs were vital to the movement of the vehicle, yet they were relatively weak compared to the rest of the structure. They had weak joints at the knees, which could be taken out by something as low-powered as a repeating blaster. These legs also weren't powerful enough to power through Durasteel cable being wrapped around them like a lasso. As we mentioned, the legs limited the speed of the AT-AT without really giving it any advantages on different types of terrain. And unlike the ATTE, they were extremely high off the ground, and all it took was damage to one leg for the entire unit to topple. The ATTE was much lower to the ground and had 6 legs, which gave it a level of redundancy that the AT-AT sorely lacked. Because of the AT-AT's massive weight, the legs routinely needed a lot of maintenance, and massive machinery was needed to lift the weight off the legs for the mechanics to work on them. You couldn't really just fix an AT-AT in the field. Due to the AT-AT's tendency to become a bullet sponge in the middle of a battle because of its immense size, mechanics had to do a thorough analysis of the internal structure of the legs so that they wouldn't collapse on their next mission. The cockpit of the AT-AT stretched out from the rest of the vehicle on a neck joint that allowed the cockpit to turn from one side to another, which just seems like an unnecessary design choice. If you are going to make the cockpit protrude out of the rest of the body, at least don't make it as vulnerable by putting it on a movable joint. The AT-AT's neck joint was widely known as one of the most vulnerable spots on the machine. If you look at modern tanks, or even not so modern tanks, the idea was to always keep the crew within the vehicle behind as much metal and protection as possible. This usually meant the center of the tank. It makes no sense to create a structure that juts out in front of the rest of the vehicle. It presents an obvious target for the enemy. I mean, even if you are a completely primitive society, if you look at an AT-AT, you will know that it resembles a gigantic beast, and you'll most likely try to attack its head and neck area because that's just common sense. Also, we talked about this before with the X-Wing. The AT-AT could have easily been outfitted with sensors and cameras and have a completely closed-off hull. Modern militaries are actually using this technology as we speak. The only reason you would create a cockpit that is on an articulating neck would be if the lasers on your cockpit are fixed in location. Again, why use fixed blasters on a head that can only turn a few degrees? If someone were to attack the AT-AT from the rear or side, the entire vehicle would have to turn around, and that would take a considerable amount of time with something as large as an AT-AT, which also used legs instead of treads. Most modern tanks and armored transports use Hertz for that reason. It gives the crew the ability to quickly get a fix on a target without having to move the vehicle as well. The AT-AT has a huge blind spot directly beneath its belly. As far as we can see, there's no way for the crew of the AT-AT to protect this area. That's how one Jedi is able to walk right up to the bottom of the AT-AT, climb up it, and then plant some explosives underneath it, destroying it.
Oh my God, it's pregnant! We're in a war! We're in a war!
In our own world, armor commanders know that a tank that isn't supported by infantry is incredibly vulnerable. The first tank charges of World War I were carried out by the British in land ships during the Battle of the Somme. The Mark I tanks immediately crashed through German lines and outpaced the infantry. Although many of these land ships broke down or ran out of gas, others were surrounded by infantry and destroyed with explosives because they lacked mechanized infantry support. Nowadays, heavy armor, especially in urban areas, would never be used without infantry to protect their vulnerable flanks and rear. Although some AT-ATs were deployed with mechanized infantry, most of the time they weren't. The ATAT is too slow, too heavy, and too tall to be a successful transport or a successful assault vehicle. The only true advantage in its design is that it offers the commander of the vehicle a wide view of the surrounding battlefield. Now, if we incorporated that shield we talked about before, the ATAT would actually make an excellent command and communication platform. It's perfectly set up. Like we said, it's extremely tall, it has a good view of the surrounding area, and also gives clear access for communications. It also has a large rear compartment that can hold speeders for messengers or additional headquarters staff. It's a massive vehicle and can even be used as a geological landmark for friendly troops across the battlefield. In my opinion, that's the best use for a vehicle that's designed in this way. Of course, the First Order thought otherwise and just made a bigger version of the AT-AT Walker, which is just so creative. Anyway, guys, let me know what you think in the comment section below about our list of flaws. Do you have any more that you want to add onto our list? Or do you still like the AT-AT despite all of its flaws? I personally am not a huge fan, but I am a fan of the Separatist hover tank, which is what we'll be breaking down in our next episode. So don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button so you don't miss out on that episode. Thanks for joining us today. If you're watching this, you are Generation Tech.